Me
Okay.
about your glasses.
Do what?
Your glasses.
What about them?
What about them? How did you pick them?
Oh my
They're
gosh, I have them in like every color they make. I saw them and so, when you get old, you go into kind of a, monogamous relationship because the lenses become so gosh darn expensive because you got the computer, you got the far away, you got the reading. And so it was hard because I had been a person who really thought that glasses were jewelry and accessorizing. And so I had like 12 different pairs. And then I got a little silver fox in me and decided that no, I needed much more expensive lenses. But then a few years ago, I had one of those flexible savings accounts and I had this bank of money at the end. So I got them in pink and I got them in clear and I got them in black.
so Kirsten and I, for those of you who are watching, Kirsten and I were in a program together. And I was gonna say, oh my gosh, I thought your glasses were pink this morning.
Yes, they are more pink this morning. Yes. Yes. Those are in the other room. These are more, universal. I can be conservative like that.
Something that grabbed my attention with you at first, and that is your look. So your hair, and maybe you can talk a little bit about that, and just how you find yourself. It's a lot of color. Again, for those of you who are watching, it's color everywhere. It's color on Kirsten. It's color in the back. It's color on her face. It's color in her hair. It's big hoop earrings. So the initial draw for me was the way you look. And
Yeah.
then you speak out and you don't hold yourself back, which I love so much. So I do want to talk about authenticity in your voice, but start me with the look.
I think that how we present ourselves is part of our spirit. It's part of our branding and it's part of our soul. And so if I believe that life is meant to be rooted in gratitude and life is meant to be rooted in joy, then to me, if I were to assign a color to that, it would not be a gray or a taupe palette. It would be bright and cheery and colorful. And so my son is 23 now. And I remember I got called to the principal's office when he was in kindergarten because he had gone to school with a pink swipe in his hair and they thought that it might be distracting. And then I show up and I have pink hair, like the whole thing. And then they were like, yeah, we're not even going to have this conversation. And that's kind of how I have always been. Funky hair color became more traditional and it became more accepted. And I was like, no. And so then, with the silver, I was like, I'm just going to work that. But I try to add color with my eyeliner or my clothes in my home. There's this wonderful trend called dopamine decor. And it is just a wonderful way of embracing everything that brought us joy. So I have like old fashioned lunch boxes. I have spray painted hot pink Barbies above my fireplace. Mindset to me is huge. And so I want to surround myself with things that make me happy. And, that's part of the joy of having an identity post divorce is that there is no, right now, I don't have another partner that I'm coming to agreement on. Like, how does this make you feel? I can just be as embracing of the ridiculousness as I want. And I may have to tone that down again in the future. But in the meantime, I'm just living my best colorful rainbow life. So, yeah.
Love it. I love it. And that brings me back to the authenticity. So you're very authentic in the way you present yourself visually. And then something that you just mentioned, you're mindful of where you are in terms of how you surround yourself with color,
Mhm.
and where you want to be, because where we look, I do it intentionally. And that is when I'm in a blue mood, I will actually put on a bright color because it's just, yeah, it sets you in a different kind of tone. But authenticity, so you keep speaking about yourself, and I'm sorry for those of you who don't know, Kirsten, I hear like I'm old. Like, it's so funny because you are an old soul, but I don't see you having an age.
Yeah.
In fact, this is something that there you go, something I share with my daughter. I'm so looking forward to connecting with Kirsten. And one of the questions, she's like, how old is she? I'm like, I don't know. Kirsten is one of those people who does not have an age. So,
Yeah. I'm 54. I've been a silver haired person since I was 40. But I think I want to push back a little bit and say that when we say things like old, or in my case, old or fat, that there are certain stories that people write about those terms that we get to decide how we accept that. So just like if someone thought that fat was an insult or a negative or or anything like that. To me, it is my relationship with gravity, and it maybe impacts like how I prioritize different activities in my life or different relationships in my life, that I get my cup being full of helping taking care of others, maybe more so than I love like getting on my Peloton bike or even being disabled. Those are different things. When I broke my ankle a few years ago, that could have been a horrible, depressing episode of like not being able to move. But to me, it gave me time for reflection. It gave me time to try and figure out, well, what does this really say about me? And the same thing goes with age or with weight. We get to decide what that means. And so if someone uses it as a derogatory term for me, I can stay emotionally neutral to that because I have a different relationship with that term. And I think it's really important that we surround ourselves with phrases that we can stay emotionally neutral to if we know people's intent versus the impact. And to me, being old isn't a bad thing. Being fat isn't a bad thing. It just shows that I have a different angle, a different framing, a different experience than other people. And isn't there something cool to learn from that for all of us? Every single person has something cool. So I think that there's a lot of money to be made off of being skinny, and there's a lot of money to be made off of being or looking young. And so if people can show that they have other models for that, like you can be your favorite self in any size body, in any age body, in any ability body, then we really can just figure out that we are so much more than our vessels. We are these souls. And I'm really into the LGBTQ community. I don't believe that sexuality is a choice. To me, when we look at here in the United States, like being transgender is being villainized right now. Like there's a lot of like legislation going on with this 1% of our population. And I serve as a loving force of nature for all of these people who have been kind of discarded by their families for just trying to be who they are. And even though it's not an experience that I can relate to, I can relate to understanding that people just need to be loved where they're at. I need to trust that you know yourself better than I ever could. And so I'm just going to accept that we're all just doing the best we can. And we're going to keep each other company as we're walking ourselves home in this mixed up world where we are expected to have some kind of self-loathing. We are expected to have some kind of self-hatred. And because that's how they get our attention. That's how they suck us into buying this or being interested in that topic or following this leader or whatever. When you're comfortable with your own self, it just makes it so much easier to just love other people, give grace to other people. And all of that starts at home. If you don't love yourself, if you can't give yourself grace, I see so many people, particularly women, who give grace to a complete stranger 10 times easier than they would ever give to themselves.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, I think that goes back to that there's profit to be made off of self-loathing. We are raised by women who were raised by women who were raised by women who had this striving for perfection kind of thing, and hide your flaws, hide your imperfections. And one of the things that I love to do as a coach is working with people who are figuring out a new identity, whether it's that they have recently come out or they've gone through a divorce or they've left corporate America. I call it identity coaching because it really is about trying to figure out, if you were the person making the decisions, driving the bus of your life, knowing that every previous version of us in the back served a purpose at some point. So many of us were sexually abused as children, and that little girl is going to make very different choices about how we go, where we go in life, versus the person who has forgiven themselves, accepted and grown from their pain, reclaimed their sexuality. It's really important that you have the favorite version of you at the steering wheel, driving the bus that makes these decisions in life. One of the people that is always on our bus are how our parents talk to us, how our parents saw us, were formed by imperfection and standards and expectations that they felt shame about and couldn't live up to. So it is about changing a generational narrative about who we can be. My mom doesn't begin to claim to understand who I am, but she tries, and through that I think she's been able to find forgiveness in some of her own imperfections as a woman and a parent and in her own identity.
I love it. You keep saying my favorite self. So it's not my best self. It's not my other self. It's my favorite self. What's your favorite self?
Yeah, I think for me, the distinction is when we say best, that there's always a superlative, a competition, a strive to do better. And so for me, a favorite self is fluid, it's ever evolving, it allows for a continuum or a spectrum. And so my favorite self at a dinner party is going to be very different than my favorite self when I'm sitting home alone on a Friday night watching Netflix and eating ice cream, because that so it really depends. It's going to be a different favorite self for who I am as a parent with my son or as someone who is coaching their clients, but giving ourselves that flexibility to kind of change our minds. What makes us feel grateful in this moment or joyful in this moment is going to change from moment to moment. And it's good to just kind of trust yourself and follow those cues.
One of our recent conversations, you mentioned the potato. And I actually mentioned it to my kids. I'm like, this person is doing a potato as a gift, as a piece of reaching out to people and
Yeah.
diverse as a potato. Can you talk to me a little bit about your vision of the potato, but also the flexibility, the favorite self, what you just mentioned in terms of how diverse we are and how multidimensional we are, and how a lot of us do not allow ourselves to be multidimensional. You're not only open to it, and I'm sure it took some work, some internal struggle and time, but also how you encourage others to be their favorite selves and be a little more flexible and be like a potato. So take me
Yeah.
there.
Well, I think when we first talk about potatoes, I like to think of them as just even how they're grown, right? Like people try to bury you, right? And they try to put different stories on you and layer you with expectations and who you're supposed to be, whether that comes from a collective ambiguous day or, just relationships in our lives, anything. But to know that potatoes actually have to be kind of buried before they can grow. And then knowing then too that once they do grow, once they do become, ripened into their favorite self, that they have all this flexibility so that they can decide if they want to be hash browns or French fries or vodka, and so to have that kind of like curiosity is part of what keeps us growing. If you ask people if they would rather have certainty or uncertainty, most people would run to certainty and want to cling their hands around it. And the truth is, there's really no such thing as true certainty. Doctors go into medicine because it feels like a very certain career, and their families did it and their parents did it. And then if COVID taught us anything, it was like, no, then you were risking your life, you were getting major pay cutbacks, schedule was changing. And so whether that's pursuing a side hustle or deciding to leave a toxic relationship, the only certainty that we're guaranteed is ourselves. And so if we have the faith to believe in ourselves and our higher power, universe, energy, whatever that looks like to you, and knowing that you and that energy can really handle anything, then it'll be okay. And knowing that the most important thing that we need to keep doing is making decisions. The lack of making decisions is part of that eternal growth. I don't care if the decision's a wrong decision, but we'll figure it out. But let's keep being active and not being passive and just figuring out, okay, what's the next step? If I have this identity, if I have this wiggle my nose identity that is my favorite self, if I went into business for myself, if I left this relationship and that person was super, super happy, what would they do in this situation? Daydream. I think the best person we can take advice from is our 80-year-old self and ask them, what should I do? Because they have walked our walk. They know us. And I think it's a great gift to be able to say, I'm okay with not knowing and just knowing that I trust myself. And, so for many people, myself included, if that includes faith, then great. And for me, faith, it doesn't have to be Jesus. It could be anything. I think we all need something to kind of lean into when life gets hard. And that's kind of the fun of it. But whether that is like a baby laugh or a blade of grass or a jar of chunky peanut butter, we all need something to know that we're all part of this interconnectedness and we have a purpose and we have gifts. And the community piece, I think, really ties into why we're here. I don't think we're designed as individuals to be solo, that we're supposed to be connecting, that I'm supposed to be reaching out and being like, oh, well, what gifts do I have that can help you embrace your favorite self? And how do we do that? And do that from a place of like not focusing on the reciprocity, but just like being invested in your joy.
Can you think of a particular moment in your life when you started to feel that this is truly something that I should be exploring and that is joy for yourself, but also, again, you come off as a very authentic human being, which for a lot of people is not an easy task, right? So we, like you said, we hide ourselves, we conform to the norms, we go about our lives. In particular, I feel women in the way that we're prescribed to go about our lives. And at a certain point in our life, we may be feeling like, is this what? What's going? So, was there a particular moment in your life when you started feeling like maybe I should explore a little more of that? Maybe I should really say what I truly feel in this particular situation, if you can think of it right now.
I think probably the biggest jump off the cliff moment for me was when I decided to legally change my last name. I went through a divorce a few years ago, and I was kind of just ready to let the stank of that whole relationship just wash off of me. And when I went through the divorce, the only option was to take my maiden name, or I could keep my married name. In my mind, I was like, I worked really hard to successfully outgrow every previous version of me. I don't want to roll backwards. And so then I was daydreaming, like username was F Bombdiggity. And so just on a whim, I was like, I'm just going to be F Bombdiggity. And the more I played with it, I was like, well, why not? It has been the most ridiculous gift to my spirit because most people are like, no, no, really. Doctors will come out and be like, no, like I don't know how many times I've had to show my driver's license, like, no, I really am Kirsten F. Bombdiggity. F is my middle name. And so if I'm feeling more proper, I will leave that out and I'll just be Kirsten Bombdiggity. But my middle name is just the letter F. And it has been such a point of clarity for myself because when we embrace the authenticity, when we burn the boat, when we say, okay, this is who I'm going to be, then all of a sudden, like I'm not everyone's cup of tea and I'm 100% okay with that. But do you know how much energy I have saved myself by changing my last name to Bombdiggity? It's so ridiculous. And there are going to be people who meet me and be like, oh, that girl is completely under medicated and needs psychiatric help. And that's 100% valid and okay that they think that. I'm not their vibe. That's fine. But like, they don't take up any of my energy anymore. I don't waste time with people who don't see my light. I think one of the things that we do as women is, in this job, when I started my own company, my title that I gave myself was Chief Lighthouse Operator because I have a lighthouse tattoo. And the lighthouse is such a powerful metaphor for us as women. So often, what I told my ex when we were struggling, I'm done being a lifeboat. I'm done being pulled under by the pain of this relationship, the abuse and the toxic ickiness of it. And so I think that being able to say to ourselves, we aren't going to be lifeboats for anybody, but my light, you're welcome to share my light. That doesn't take anything from me. Let's share light, but let's not bring each other down in the process. And so the more that we can be a community of lighthouses for each other, the better. And so Bombdiggity is kind of a lighthouse because it says, well, that girl's just weird. And if it makes people curious, then come on over, let's just have a talk on what that looks like. The last thing I would ever want is for anyone else to ever feel like I want them to be a Bombdiggity. Like the whole gift of me being authentic is not that I can make you more like me, but so that I can make you more like you. And so how do I help you know that I'm a safe person so that you could have that curiosity without me having a bias? It's important that you feel safe to explore that. I think that that's key. It isn't just about being ridiculous to be recentering. It's showing you that, no, when you and I are together and you're my client and we're trying to work, it's your stage. Like it is truly a gift for you to just kind of dance and explore and take in all the different senses and experiences and figure out, well, why is that? When there is trauma in our past, I think that there is a inclination to kind of lean into that as an anchor of significance or of pain. If you can leverage all of those things to know that there's a great little parenting book, a little Jewish parenting book called Blessings of a Skinned Knee. And it just, like, if we can see that I want to embrace every single thing that has happened to me, including all of the trauma, because it's part of my Jenga tower. And I really like my tower. So I couldn't pull this piece out or that piece out or this piece. I couldn't do any of that without the tower looking completely different. So if I'm really going to embrace this hot mess, wonderful, joyful, imperfect masterpiece that I am, then that includes being grateful for, you know, all all of it, all of it.
I want to go a little bit back into the light and the lighthouse and the lifeboat, and
Yeah.
they are both in the sea. I don't know if you ever made that connection, and that is the water and then the bigger sea or ocean, but both are anchored for you in the water.
I'm an Aquarius. No, I never made that connection before.
But being a lighthouse, you are given the light, but you're also given the light to the lifeboats, given the light to the boats, and you're
Yeah.
shining onto the wider sea. You do have a purpose. If you were to think about it and your connection to now feeling like you want to give out the light and maybe not being conscious about it before, but you are destined in the way you're seeing yourself, and that is a lighthouse. Given the light to those who are not quite seeing, they're in the dark, and
Yeah.
you're there to provide a little bit of perspective. So, can you take me there?
I mean, when I think about the lighthouse, it's true that I hadn't thought about that they were both water, but I think that water is also a wonderful symbol for life, the way that it ebbs and flows and comes and goes and really can be above our heads, can have a whole life underneath. When I think about mindset and limiting beliefs too, when we think about like the iceberg analogy and how there's so much work, like in my consciousness, I can think, oh, I'm not getting in my own way. Well, if that's just like the top 10, 15, 20% is what we have awareness of or consciousness of. If the rest of it is underneath, what is part of that 70 or 80 or 90% that is actually driving our actual decisions or self-worth, or how are we dealing with the below the line? How do we make sure that the top portion is really representing who we want to be in this world and finding out? So it is important to have these deep conversations. How do we find that vulnerability and still feel safe? And what does it take to feel safe? What does that look like? What if we did feel safe, how would we make different choices? Would I have gone out and started my own company 5 years ago, 10 years? I don't know. But it makes you ask different questions when you have different data points like that.
You talked a little bit about your mess, and that is
Yeah.
how, whether you want other people to see your mess or whether you really want to go beyond the mess and, share the wisdom. You have grown into this beautiful version of yourself. And I'm sure there were beautiful versions before, but now it's the new
Right.
one, and that is the way you look and the way you feel and the way you talk about your favorite self. But a lot of it came from a mess. So a bunch of messes that you have experienced growing up, growing into the adult that you are right now. Without going into details, unless you want to, can you just share with us a little bit about the mess and how it educates us and how it makes us into these better favorite selves?
I think for me, I lost my father at a young age. My mother had been a 36-year-old with four children. She was a stay-at-home mom, and then she was widowed, and her life, as she had dreamed it and as it was happening, just evaporated. I really do believe that she did the best that she could at the time, but she didn't have the ability to be a presence in our life immediately following his passing. And that left all of us vulnerable to a different degree. My care was largely left to the pedophile minister of our church. And that was a strong relationship in my life for a couple years. It was hard because I had abandonment issues from my father dying, from my mother not being present, and just trying to figure out, 9, 10, psychologically is a hard age. And then when you have those holes and you don't do the work, you end up maybe picking partners, building relationships with people that kind of toxically match you rather than invite you into a better version of yourself. My son's father is a perfectly wonderful human being, but we were not compatible. We were not in love. The idea was to just be safe and secure and certain, and he made sense on paper. I'm twice divorced. I was married to my son's father for 10 years, and then I married for love, but I married an addict who had not worked the program. And I was continually trying to help him, not so much as a partner, but as a project. And just kind of ending up with this little girl who grew up with wanting to be a stay-at-home mom and have a happily ever after and a white picket fence. Then fast forward decades later, and I'm just this kind of bizarre blend of hoe and wholesome. And, where I love just figuring out who I am because I don't have any role models to show me what that life was supposed to look like. There was no game plan. There was no book to follow on what does it look like to be a twice divorced person who thought they were going to be this white picket fence and whatnot. And then just realizing that I needed to be the love of my life, that it was really important that I shouldn't be looking for another person to kind of fill in these Swiss cheese holes of my soul, but that if I could figure out a way, and it is still so much safer, so much more comfortable for me to take care of other people than myself, still to this day, but I'm getting better and I'm getting more practice. I think that we sometimes feel like we have to have it all figured out, that we have to be at the end of the finish line, that I have to run the marathon before I can teach you how to run, when sometimes it's just like, oh, I bought a pair of tennis shoes. Let me show you what it takes to buy a good pair of shoes. Like, we don't have to have it all figured out. We can be the mess. We can be a work in progress. But even if I'm 2, 3, 4 steps ahead of you, then I can still invite you to run with me and we can figure it out together. I haven't figured it out, but I've been to hell. And so I will go with you to hell because I know how to get out of there. And I think that there's something cool about having somebody like a tour guide with you that doesn't come across as somebody who has all the answers. I'm not trying to give you the best solution for, breast cancer. I'm not trying how to figure out how to help you do your budget so that you maximize your return on investment and can retire at 52. I'm trying to figure out like what makes you happy and what does that look like, and knowing that you can discard every other person's version of happy or joy and really define that all for yourself. And that's a really cool gift that I can share with other people. I wrote a book, and it really is just about all of the different kind of life hacks, brain hacks we can do to ourselves to help figure out how to just keep moving the needle forward. Yeah.
I love it. I also love something that I think you may be aware of, since now you mentioned that you wrote a book. Your language is very powerful, and that is, you are able to go into places that most of us are not, and that is, into allegories and metaphors and finding connections in not exactly obvious places. So that's just wonderful. I do want to go back a little bit into your favorite self, and that is your favorite places, and that is what, again, I'm looking at you, I'm looking at this beautiful thing that is orange right in the back, and what you're wearing in terms of the color. What did it take for you to get there? And that is finding the little pieces that made you happy. Was it a process? Was it like, okay, I'm going to be intentional, I'm going to be introspective, I'm going to surround myself with this color, I like this? Was it this big event happened in your life and you're like, you know what? F this, I'm going to do all of these things that I always wanted to do, and I'm going to start with the 12 of them.
Yeah. I think that with anything that brings you joy, you start out with just like a taste, right? So like I made a purse out of a Muppet movie lunchbox. I got a tattoo of an F-bomb. I maybe added rhinestones to a pair of glasses once. Like they were just turtle frames, and I glued on some sparkles, and little by little. And then when post divorce, buying my first home where I was the only one that was paying the mortgage, that was kind of like when the wheels came off and it just turned into a spaceship. And so, just figuring out like all of that is just, I still wear a lot of black, surprisingly, but it's all got to be intermixed. Like I have just had the most fun. I bought a jean jacket just so I could decorate it in ridiculous patches and pins. I had a big patch made for the back that says Bombdiggity and put a little QR code to my website, that says be a QRD pie. And so again, I think that's part of just staying playful, staying curious. They have to be able to see my light and not think, oh my gosh, this is an under-medicated potato. I need somebody that can meet me where I'm at. Ironically, most of the partners that I tend to attract are kind of introverted, more quiet, nerdy guys. We just kind of balance each other out as we're figuring it out. So just keep listening. Just keep staying curious.
About the quiet and the nerdy, what would you say to the quiet and the nerdy, the women out there, but also the humans out there who have been quiet and nerdy and really are attracted to the light? And so they want to tap a little bit into it. And so they get attracted to your sparkles or the color or the hair, but not quite want to be that themselves just because it doesn't feel exactly comfortable. I want to maybe focus a little more on women. You were so easy in talking about joy and just what brings you joy. And I found it quite difficult with a lot of the women that I work with, not the kids, but the women. When you ask them about joy, they kind of stop, and oftentimes they're not even able to name one thing. So what would you say to the quiet and the nerdy and the maybe not so quiet, but the regular women out there who are not able to name the joy? Like, where do you start?
I think it all is rooted in curiosity and feeling safe enough to kind of explore that. And for some people, I mean, light looks different when you have it in different light fixtures, when you have different size wattages, when you have different, in different like outside lights. And so to know that light comes in all different shapes and sizes and colors and wattages, like the most important thing to know though is that you have a light. And I think that sometimes we just kind of get beat up into this world and think that everything that we need to be whole is outside of us. And if we know that our light is in there and staying curious to that, for some people, a light truly is just sitting down and reading a good book. For some people, it really is about finger painting with their kids or making the most amazing chocolate chip cookie or looking forward to Thanksgiving and just looking around the table and just feeling happy. So I think trying to ask yourself, when was the last time I remember being happy? What was my favorite vacation? What was a book that really kind of stuck with me like for years later? And just kind of trying to figure out, well, what was it about it that made that different? Why was that best friend my best friend? What were they able to give me that no one else in the world could give me? What is it that made me smile? And just kind of going from there. But it can be a mustard seed, it can be the littlest act of gratitude or joy, and then just water the hell out of that.
And we will wrap up with that. Water the hell out of that.
Yeah. Part of that though is also to give it more light, right? So it's so important to surround yourself with people who see your light, and that if anything, that would be one of my key takeaways, is that you cannot be a light without being surrounded by other people's light. So know that the people that you're surrounding yourself with matter so, so, so much. And so if you're feeling beat down and exhausted and tired and just feel like giving up, change your circle. You don't have to change the whole thing, but find one more friend, find one more mentor, follow one more podcast, whatever it is that just kind of puts a little crack into the darkness and lets a little different light in for you.